I took the job out of desperation. That's what I kept telling myself as I pulled into the gravel parking lot of Willowbrook Cemetery just before 10 at night. The car's headlights swept across the wrought iron gates, tall and imposing against the night sky. My bank account was down to double digits, rent was due in a week, and night watchmen at a cemetery paid better than I expected. Weird hours, sure, but beggars can't be choosers. Logan Brooks was waiting for me by the maintenance shed, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't look like the kind of guy who's scared easily, weathered face, calloused hands, eyes that had seen too much. But there was something in the way he kept looking over his shoulder that made my stomach knot up. "You must be Declan," he said, crushing the cigarette under his boot. "Glad you showed up. Some folks don't, even after saying they will." I nodded, trying to look more confident than I felt. "Thanks for the opportunity. I really need this job. Most who take it do." Logan pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. "Night shift's simple enough. Walk the grounds every hour or so. Make sure no kids are messing around. Check the mausoleums for break-ins." He handed me the keys, then reached into his truck and pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight. "Battery's full," he said, passing it to me. "There's spares in the shed if you need them." The flashlight was heavier than it looked, solid and reassuring in my hand. I clicked it on and off, testing the beam, bright enough to cut through the darkest corners of the cemetery. "One more thing," Logan said, his voice dropping. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "Rules, 4 of them. Not suggestions, rules. You follow these, you'll be fine." I took the paper, unfolding it to find a handwritten list. 1. Avoid the 3rd row of headstones. 2. No running. 3. Stay away from the angel statue after midnight. 4. Leave by 1 a.m. I looked up at Logan, waiting for the punchline. His face remained deadly serious. "The guy before you, Gavin Thompson," Logan said, looking past me toward the cemetery. "Good worker. Strong. Confident. Maybe too confident. Didn't think the rules applied to him." "What happened to him?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Missing 3 weeks now. They found his car half a mile down the road. Door was torn clean off." Logan lit another cigarette with shaking hands. "Police think he ran into trouble. Animal attack, maybe. But they won't find him. Because he didn't follow the rules." Logan took a long drag. "Especially that last one. Always, always leave by 1. I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was being ridiculous, but the look in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't a joke or an initiation prank. This was a warning. "I'll follow them," I said, tucking the paper into my jacket pocket. "Good." Logan checked his watch. "I'll be back at 6 tomorrow morning. If you need anything before then, you're on your own. Cell reception's spotty at best out here." With that cheerful note, he climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving me alone with my flashlight, the keys, and a growing sense that I'd made a terrible mistake. Once the red taillights disappeared down the road, I turned toward the cemetery. Willowbrook wasn't particularly large or old by local standards, but in the darkness it seemed to stretch endlessly. Rows of headstones caught the moonlight, creating a field of shadows and stone. The maintenance shed stood to my right, a small building that housed tools and a tiny break room with a desk, chair, and ancient coffee maker. I started my first patrol, keeping the flashlight beam steady as I walked the perimeter. The night was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant traffic. After walking the boundaries, I began moving through the rows of graves, checking names and dates out of nervous habit. The cemetery was laid out in a grid pattern, making it easy to navigate. I counted the rows as I went, remembering the first rule. When I reached the second row, I slowed, my flashlight beam wavering slightly as it swept over the stones ahead. The third row looked wrong. Even from where I stood, I could see the grass was different, yellowed and withered compared to the healthy green surrounding it. As I moved closer, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. My breath fogged in front of my face, though it was a mild September night. Something told me to keep my distance, but curiosity pushed me forward until I stood at the edge of the third row. The air felt heavy here, pressing against my skin. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I swept the beam across the headstones, reading names of people long dead. Then the light caught on a name, Michelle Roach, 1823-1847, a simple stone weathered by time. And behind it, something moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow shifting as clouds passed overhead. But then I saw it clearly, a figure crouching behind the headstone. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin, bent at impossible angles. Its mouth stretched across what should have been a face, wide and gaping. I froze, unable to look away. The figure didn't move, just stared back with eyes I couldn't quite see. Then I blinked, and it was gone, melting into the shadows between the graves. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stumbled backward, almost tripping over my own feet. I fumbled for the paper in my pocket, unfolding it with shaking hands to read the rules again. Avoid the third row of headstones. No running. Stay away from the angel statue after midnight. Leave by 1 a.m. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The rules weren't suggestions or superstitions. They were warnings, and I'd just seen why the first one existed. I tucked the paper back into my pocket and walked away, quickly, but not running, from the third row. For the rest of my patrol, I gave that section a wide berth, keeping my flashlight trained on the ground ahead of me and trying not to think about stretched mouths and impossible limbs. The night stretched on as I continued my rounds, checking the small chapel, the mausoleums, and the maintenance buildings. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide something waiting. I kept checking my watch, counting down the hours until dawn. But mostly I thought about those rules, and how I was going to follow every single one of them to the letter. I was checking the maintenance shed, making sure all the tools were accounted for. The shed was bigger than I expected, with a workbench along the back wall and shelves stacked with equipment. I'd already found the break room with its ancient coffee maker, but I wanted to get familiar with everything before continuing my patrol. My flashlight beam swept across rakes, shovels, and a riding mower parked in the corner. The place smelled like gasoline, dirt, and something metallic. I picked up a clipboard hanging by the door, flipping through the maintenance logs to get a sense of the regular upkeep. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Someone else's. They came from outside, crunching on gravel. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped too. I took a step toward the door. The footsteps outside mimicked mine exactly. One step, same cadence. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. My mouth went dry. I pulled out the rules from my pocket, reading them again by flashlight. Rule 2, no running. I swallowed hard and tucked the paper away. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the quiet shed. No answer, just the distant rustle of trees in the night breeze. I took another step. The footsteps outside matched mine perfectly. Another step. Another echo. This wasn't right. Logan hadn't mentioned anyone else working tonight. I gripped the flashlight tighter and stepped outside, sweeping the beam across the graveyard. Nothing moved in the pale light. Rows of headstones stood silent. The maintenance building cast long shadows across the gravel path. I turned slowly, scanning every direction. The footsteps had stopped when I exited the shed. I walked forward, and there they were again, behind me now, matching my pace exactly. I spun around. Empty path, empty graveyard. I kept walking, trying to keep my breathing steady. The footsteps followed, perfectly synchronized with mine. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed, they slowed. I headed toward the center of the cemetery, away from the third row. My flashlight beam bounced with each step, creating moving shadows that made everything worse. A branch snapped in the trees to my left. I jerked my head toward the sound. The footsteps behind me stopped when I did. Another snap, closer this time. Whatever it was moving through the tree line that bordered the eastern edge of the cemetery. I kept walking, fighting the urge to look back again. The footsteps resumed, matching mine step for step. But now there was something else. Heavier footfalls coming from the trees, breaking branches as they moved. My heart hammered in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but Rule 2 burned in my mind. No running. I walked faster instead, staying on the paths between the graves. The synchronized footsteps behind me quickened to match. The heavier sounds from the trees kept pace too, drawing closer. Something was tracking me. I clutched the flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. The beam shook slightly as I walked. I wanted to sprint back to my car, but I couldn't shake Logan's warning about the previous night watchman who hadn't followed the rules. So I walked, steadily, quickly, but never breaking into a run. The heavy footsteps in the trees crashed closer, not bothering with stealth anymore. Whatever it was sounded big, much bigger than a person. I could hear branches breaking under its weight, leaves rustling as it moved parallel to my path. 5 more minutes passed this way, then 10, 15. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat despite the cool night air. I kept my pace steady, walking in wide loops around the cemetery, staying away from the third row and keeping to open areas. 20 minutes after it started, the footsteps behind me gradually faded. The crashing in the trees stopped too. The cemetery fell silent again except for the sound of my own footsteps and breathing. I stopped, listening hard. Nothing. Whatever had been following me was gone, or at least it had stopped tracking me. I checked my watch. 11:45. Almost midnight. Rule 3 would take effect soon. Stay away from the angel statue after midnight. I'd noticed the statue earlier during my first patrol, an 8-foot marble angel near the entrance. Its wings were spread wide, hands extended in blessing over the cemetery. The craftsmanship was impressive, the marble polished smooth and gleaming even in the dim light. I decided to check it one more time before midnight. I walked toward the entrance, still keeping my pace measured and calm. No footsteps followed me now. The angel stood on its concrete base, exactly as I'd seen it before. The marble figure towered over me, its blank eyes staring into the distance. I swept my flashlight over it, noting the fine details in the carved feathers and robes. I checked my watch again, 1 minute to midnight. I backed away from the statue, remembering Rule 3. Whatever happened at midnight, I didn't want to be close when it occurred. I positioned myself about 50 yards away, behind a large oak tree. From here, I could still see the statue clearly, but I figured this was far enough to count as staying away from it. My watch beeped softly. Midnight. I looked up at the angel statue and felt my breath catch. It was gone. The concrete pedestal stood empty. The massive marble statue had completely vanished. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. I swept my flashlight across the area, illuminating the empty base. The beam revealed nothing but smooth concrete where the angel had stood seconds before. I approached slowly, keeping Rule 3 in mind, but needing to see for myself. The pedestal was completely bare. No broken pieces, no scrape marks, nothing to indicate how an 8-foot marble statue could have disappeared without a sound. I ran my hand over the empty base. The concrete was cool and smooth under my fingers. There were no tool marks, no damage, absolutely nothing to explain what had happened. They never tell the new ones everything they should know. I froze at the sound of a woman's voice directly behind me. I turned around and found a young woman standing just a few feet away. She wore a white dress that looked like something from another time, high-necked with lace trim and a bodice that cinched at her waist before flowing down in layers of fabric. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, a few loose strands framing pale features. "They never tell the new ones everything they should know," she repeated, her voice soft but clear in the night air. I stepped back from the empty pedestal, my hand falling away from the smooth concrete. "Who are you?" She didn't move closer, just watched me with eyes that seemed to reflect more moonlight than they should. "The woman never leaves," she said, ignoring my question. "She's bound to this place." My mouth felt dry. "What woman?" "The one they tried to hide." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "The last watchman. He tried to help find her grave." "Gavin?" I asked, the name catching in my throat. She nodded once. "He wanted to help her rest." I glanced back at the empty pedestal where the angel statue had stood just minutes ago. The third rule suddenly made more sense. Stay away from the angel statue after midnight, not because the statue itself was dangerous, but because of what happened when it disappeared. "This is about the angel," I said, pieces clicking together in my head. "The statue. That's why it's gone." The woman's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Smart. Smarter than the last one. As I watched, her appearance began to change. Her skin turned translucent, like frosted glass, with blue-black veins visible underneath. Her eyes darkened until they were completely black, like pools of oil reflecting nothing. Her mouth opened slightly, revealing teeth that seemed to multiply and sharpen before my eyes, becoming needle-like points crowding her mouth. "You should run now," she said, her voice taking on a brittle, crystalline quality. "It's almost time." I didn't need to be told twice. I broke into a sprint toward the entrance, breaking rule number 2 without hesitation. Behind me, laughter rang out, high and clear like breaking glass, following me through the dark cemetery. I fumbled with my keys at my car, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door and throw myself inside. I started the engine with shaking hands and pulled away from the cemetery, gravel spraying under my tires. In my rearview mirror, I could see her standing at the cemetery gates, completely motionless, watching my retreat. She didn't try to follow, just stood there like a pale sentinel until I turned onto the main road and she disappeared from view. I drove until I found an all-night diner about 15 minutes away, pulled into the parking lot, and sat there with the engine running for several minutes, trying to get my breathing under control. Eventually, I went inside, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and stayed in a booth until the sky lightened with dawn. There was no way I was going back to that cemetery before daylight. At 8 in the morning, I drove back to Willowbrook Cemetery. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the parking lot, the place looking completely different in the morning light. Logan's truck was already there, parked near the maintenance shed. I found him by one of the mausoleums, replacing dead flowers with fresh ones from a plastic bucket at his feet. "You're still alive," he said when he saw me, not sounding particularly surprised. "Good." "The rules," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "They're real." Logan set down a bunch of yellow carnations and straightened up. "Told you they were." I saw her, a woman in white. She said something about the last watchman trying to help find a grave. Logan's weathered face hardened. Gavin thought he knew better, thought he could solve things. He picked up the bucket of flowers, found his car half a mile down the road. Door wasn't just open, it was torn clean off, metal bent like it was paper. I looked toward the cemetery entrance. The angel statue stood on its pedestal, exactly where it had been yesterday, wings spread and hands extended in blessing. Sunlight gleamed off the polished marble. "I can find someone else," Logan said, studying my face. "Not many stick around after the first night." I should have quit right there. Should have handed back the keys and walked away. But something about what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, it pulled at me. There were answers in that cemetery, explanations for things I couldn't understand. I'll be back tonight, I heard myself say, surprising both of us. Same time, Logan nodded slowly. Your funeral, he muttered, then added, just follow the rules this time. All of them. I looked back at the angel statue, standing innocently in the morning light. Part of me was terrified to return, but another part, the part that had made me approach the third row and watch the angel statue at midnight, needed to know more about what happened in Willowbrook Cemetery after dark. I came back for my second night better prepared than before. My backpack held extra flashlight batteries, a thermos of hot coffee, and a small notebook where I'd sketched the cemetery layout from memory. The weight of it against my back felt reassuring as I walked through the gates of Willowbrook Cemetery. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I made my way to the maintenance shed. The night air felt colder than yesterday, or maybe it was just my nerves. I unlocked the maintenance shed and set up a small base of operations, coffee on the desk, notebook open, flashlight checked and rechecked. The rules paper sat beside my makeshift workstation, a constant reminder of what I needed to avoid. My watch read 10:30 when I started my first patrol. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness as I walked the perimeter, making mental notes of any changes since last night. Everything looked normal. Tombstones stood in neat rows, the mausoleums were undisturbed, and the chapel door remained locked. I took careful steps to avoid the third row of headstones. Even from a distance, I could see the yellowed grass that marked its boundary. But tonight, something was different. Movement caught my eye, shadows shifting between the markers. I stopped and aimed my light directly at the row. Figures stood among the graves. 3, maybe 4 of them, their forms blurry and indistinct like heat mirages. They didn't move away from my light like normal trespassers would. Instead, they turned toward me, their faces hidden in darkness. One raised what might have been an arm, pointing directly at me. I heard whispers carried on the wind, too faint to make out words, but clearly coming from their direction. The figures never crossed the boundary of dead grass, staying firmly within the third row as if confined there. I backed away, keeping my eyes on them until I reached a safe distance. In my notebook, I wrote, 10:45 p.m., multiple entities in third row, pointing, whispering, confined to their area. For the next half hour, I continued my patrol, giving the third row a wide berth. The coffee kept me alert as I checked each section of the cemetery, methodically working through my mental checklist. At 11:15, the footsteps started again. Just like last night, they matched my pace perfectly at first. 1 step for each of mine. But something changed. The footsteps began to circle, growing louder, no longer mirroring my movements. They came from the left, then behind me, then to my right, drawing closer with each circuit. I froze, listening. The steps continued for 3 more paces before stopping. Whatever was making them was now closer than it had been yesterday. My flashlight beam swept the area, revealing nothing but graves and shadows. I took a step forward, and the footsteps followed, not in sync anymore, but deliberately trailing me. I quickened my pace slightly, careful not to run. Near the eastern fence, where the ground was soft from recent rain, I noticed something in the mud. Kneeling down, I directed my light at the impressions in the earth. Footprints, but not human. Each print had 3 distinct toes ending in sharp points that dug deep into the soil. They were small, maybe 6 inches long, but pressed so deeply into the mud that whatever made them must have been heavy. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures, then sketched the prints in my notebook, adding measurements and details. Below the drawing, I wrote, 11:27 p.m. in human tracks, 3-toed with claw marks. Deep impressions suggest significant weight despite small size. After documenting the prints, I continued my patrol, more alert than before. The footsteps followed me intermittently, sometimes disappearing for minutes before starting again from a different direction. As midnight approached, I made sure to position myself as far from the angel statue as possible. I checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. From my vantage point behind a large oak tree, I could just make out the statue's silhouette near the entrance. At exactly midnight, I heard it, a grinding sound, like stone scraping against stone. The noise lasted only seconds, and when it stopped, the statue was gone from its pedestal. I wrote in my notebook with shaking hands, 12 a.m. Angel statue disappeared, accompanied by sound of grinding stone. No visual on how it moved. Why are you avoiding me? The woman's voice came from behind me, the same one from last night. I turned slowly. She stood 10 feet away, still wearing that white period dress, her dark hair moving slightly though there was no wind. Tonight, her appearance seemed more solid, less like a normal woman and more like the entity I knew her to be. Skin too pale, eyes too dark. I'm just doing my job, I said, taking a step backward. Your job requires you to run away? Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. My job requires me to patrol the entire cemetery. She smiled, showing teeth that looked normal at first glance but seemed to multiply the longer I looked. You're not like the others. You're curious, I can see it. Movement in my peripheral vision drew my attention. From the shadows between graves, more shapes emerged. Twisted figures with elongated limbs and glowing eyes that reflected my flashlight beam. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, keeping their distance but clearly aware of me. I counted 6 distinct entities, each more grotesque than the last. One appeared to walk on all fours, its back bent at an impossible angle. Another seemed to float inches above the ground, its lower half fading into mist. My friends wanted to meet you, the woman said. They don't often get visitors who leave. I checked my watch. 12:22 a.m. Still plenty of time before 1 o'clock. What happened to Gavin? I asked, hoping to keep her talking while maintaining my distance. Her smile widened. He wanted to help. He stayed too long. The entities circled wider, keeping at least 20 yards between us. I continued my patrol, walking backward when necessary to keep them all in view. Every few minutes, I checked my watch. 12:35 a.m. The woman followed at a consistent distance, occasionally disappearing and reappearing closer, but never touching me. 12:47 a.m. The other entities grew bolder, their circling pattern tightening. The one on all fours left scratch marks in the earth as it moved. I documented everything in short, hurried notes, my handwriting growing messier as the minutes passed. At 12:58, I closed my notebook and placed it in my backpack. I need to go now, I said to the woman, who stood watching me with those oil-black eyes. So soon? She asked, her voice cracking like thin ice. The night is just beginning. I'll be back tomorrow, I said, backing toward the entrance. The other entities had formed a loose semicircle behind her, their glowing eyes fixed on me. None made a move to stop me as I reached the gates and unlocked my car. As I started the engine, I looked back at the cemetery. The woman stood just inside the gates, watching. The others had vanished. My watch read 12:59 when I pulled onto the main road, leaving Willowbrook Cemetery behind me for the night. I spent the next few days buried in research. The public library's local history section became my second home, with the librarian, a gray-haired woman named Marjorie, eventually recognizing me on sight. Back again? She asked on my 3rd consecutive visit, sliding a stack of archived newspapers toward me. Not many folks take such interest in old Willowbrook. I nodded, flipping through yellowed pages of the County Gazette dating back to the 1950s. Just curious about local history. What I didn't tell her was that I'd barely slept since my second night at the cemetery. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those entities circling me, the woman in white watching with those oil-black eyes. My notebook filled with dates, names, and patterns. By Wednesday afternoon, I'd found what I was looking for. Disappearances. Not just Gavin Thompson 3 weeks ago, but others stretching back decades. a groundskeeper in 1998, a teenager on a dare in 1982, a police officer investigating vandalism in 1975. All vanished near Willowbrook Cemetery, their cases never solved. The pattern became clearer when I dug deeper into the microfiche archives. Every few years, someone went missing in or around Willowbrook. The cases were always written off: runaways, animal attacks, or simply unexplained disappearances. But they all shared one detail: they happened at night. On Thursday, I hit the jackpot. Buried in an 1847 newspaper, barely legible through the grainy microfilm, "Witch hanged at dawn." Michelle Roach, aged 24 years, was hanged this morning following conviction of witchcraft and consorting with dark forces. Multiple witnesses testified to seeing Miss Roach walking after sunset in Willowbrook Cemetery, speaking to unseen entities and performing rituals over fresh graves. Miss Roach maintained her innocence to her final breath, cursing those who condemned her and vowing to return. Her remains were interred in the third row of Willowbrook Cemetery without ceremony. My hands shook as I printed the article. Michelle Roach, the name on the headstone in the third row, the woman in white. I kept digging and found another significant piece in an 1899 town council record. Following repeated reports of grave desecrations in the third row of Willowbrook Cemetery, the council has approved funds for increased security measures, including the installation of a marble angel statue at the entrance, donated by the Wilcox family. The statue will serve as both memorial and guardian of the sacred grounds. The timing wasn't coincidental. The angel statue appeared 52 years after Michelle's death, following what the papers delicately called grave desecrations. I wondered what really happened. Bodies moved, dug up, something that required a guardian to be placed at the entrance. By Friday evening, I had assembled enough to see the whole picture. Michelle Roach, executed as a witch in 1847, buried in the third row. Grave disturbances 50 years later. An angel statue erected as a guardian. And, since then, people disappearing, always at night, always near the cemetery. I drove to Willowbrook for my third shift with a plan. Not just to observe anymore, but to understand what happened after 1 a.m. I parked outside the gates at 10 p.m. sharp, my backpack heavier than previous nights. Along with my usual supplies, flashlight, notebook, coffee, I'd brought a small digital camera with night vision capability. Logan wasn't there to meet me this time. He'd left the maintenance shed unlocked with a note taped to the door. "Your funeral." Real encouraging. I walked the perimeter first, checking each section methodically while staying clear of the third row. The entities there watched me pass, their blurry forms standing motionless among the headstones. I counted 6 of them tonight, more than before. At 11:30, I climbed a sturdy oak tree near the entrance and mounted my camera on a branch with a clear view of the cemetery gates. I angled it carefully to capture as much of the grounds as possible, especially the angel statue. If something happened to me after 1 a.m., at least there would be evidence. The camera's small red recording light blinked in the darkness as I climbed down and continued my patrol. The matching footsteps started earlier tonight, pacing me from just behind the tree line, occasionally breaking branches. I ignored them, focusing on my plan. At 11:55, I positioned myself with a clear view of the angel statue, but not behind the oak tree like before. Tonight, I wanted to see exactly how it disappeared. Midnight struck. A grinding sound cut through the silence like stone scraping against stone. I watched, transfixed, as the angel statue simply sank. Not vanishing instantly, but descending into the ground as if the earth beneath it had turned to liquid. Within seconds, the pedestal stood empty. "You came back." I turned to find the woman, Michelle, standing closer than ever before. Her white dress seemed more solid tonight, less ethereal, but her eyes had changed, now completely black from corner to corner, like pools of oil. "I did," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You're different from the others." Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "You want to know things." "I want to help," I told her. the lie catching in my throat. "I've been researching your story, Michelle." Her expression changed at the sound of her name, surprise, then anger. The air around us grew colder. "You know who I am." Her voice cracked like thin ice breaking. "Then you know what they did to me. They hanged you in 1847, called you a witch." "I wasn't a witch." Her form flickered, momentarily showing something less human underneath, something with too many angles. I could just see them, the ones already here, the ones between worlds. Around us, more entities emerged from the darkness than I'd seen on previous nights. The crawling one with the bent back, the floating one with legs that dissolved into mist. New ones too, a tall figure with arms that reached the ground, another with no visible face, just smooth skin where features should be. "What happens at 1 o'clock?" I asked, glancing at my watch. 12:22 a.m. Michelle smiled, revealing teeth that were now all needle-sharp. "The veil thins, the worlds touch, and those who stay," she gestured to the entities surrounding us. "They join us. Like Gavin, he wanted to help me too." Her smile widened impossibly. "He's still looking for my grave." I backed up a step, maintaining distance between us. "Your headstone is in the 3rd row." "My headstone," she hissed, the words twisting with bitterness. "Not my bones." The entities circled us, keeping their distance but watching with gleaming eyes that reflected my flashlight beam. "Help me find where they really buried me," Michelle demanded, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "They moved me. They hid me." "Who did?" "The ones who feared what I'd become." Her form flickered again, momentarily revealing something tall and spindly beneath the human appearance. "Help me find my grave, and I'll let you leave." I checked my watch again. 12:40 a.m. I needed to keep her talking until I could make my exit before 1 a.m. "The angel statue," I said. "It was put there after your death. Something about grave desecrations." Michelle laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "They couldn't keep me in the ground. I kept coming back. So they moved me, hid me, and put their guardian angel to watch over me." The entities drew closer, their circle tightening. I noticed with growing unease that they positioned themselves between me and the cemetery gates. "I'll help you," I lied again, watching the minutes tick by. 12:50 a.m. "But I need to come back with tools, to look properly." Michelle's face contorted with rage. "No more leaving, no more waiting." The ground beneath her feet blackened as if burning. "You will help me now." At 12:55, I turned and ran toward the exit, no longer caring about Rule 2. The gates loomed ahead, my car visible just beyond them. I fumbled for my keys as I ran, the entities howling behind me. I reached the gates and jammed my key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again, twisting harder, but something was blocking it from the inside. I pushed against the gates, but they wouldn't budge. Something invisible pressed back, holding them shut. "Going somewhere?" Michelle's voice came from right behind me. I spun around. The woman stood just feet away, the other entities forming a semicircle behind her. Her appearance had changed again. Her skin now translucent with visible black veins pulsing beneath. Her fingers elongated into sharp points. "The rules," I gasped. "I need to leave by 1. "Rules are for those who have choices," Michelle said, her voice no longer sounding human. "You lost your choice when you came back a 3rd time." I looked at my watch. 12:59 a.m. 1 minute left. The entities closed in, their forms becoming more solid, more defined with each second. I pressed my back against the gates, searching desperately for an escape. "What happens at 1? I asked again, my voice cracking. Michelle smiled, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. "You join us." My watch beeped, 1:05 a.m. The world shifted. The air rippled like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The cemetery around me began to change. Headstones aging rapidly before my eyes, some crumbling to dust while others grew taller, more ornate. The trees twisted, branches reaching down like grasping hands. The night sky above turned a deep blood red. The ground beneath my feet softened like mud, and I sank ankle-deep as reality itself transformed around me. I watched reality crumble around me. The cemetery I'd spent 3 nights patrolling transformed before my eyes, twisting into something impossible and horrific. The headstones, once solid, immovable markers of the dead, aged decades in seconds. Their surfaces cracked and weathered, names eroding away as lichen and moss spread across the stone like time-lapse footage of centuries passing in moments. The trees that had been still sentinels now bent and contorted, their trunks twisting like writhing bodies. Branches reached downward with unnatural intent, bark splitting to reveal what looked disturbingly like faces frozen mid-scream. Above, the night sky bled. The darkness gave way to a sickening crimson that pulsed like an open wound, casting everything in a hellish red glow that made shadows move with a life of their own. "Welcome to my world," Michelle said, her voice no longer human but a collection of broken sounds that somehow formed words. "The world between worlds." I tried to back away, but the mud-like ground held my feet with surprising strength. "What is this place?" "This is Willowbrook, as it truly exists after the veil thins," Michelle explained, her skin now completely transparent, black veins pumping what couldn't possibly be blood through her form. "This is where I've been trapped since they hanged me." "You're Michelle Roach," I said, my voice shaking as I tried to make sense of what was happening. "The woman they executed for witchcraft in 1847. Her black eyes narrowed. "I wasn't a witch. I could see them, the ones who exist between worlds. I could speak to them, help them." She gestured to the entities surrounding us. "Just as I can see you now, Declan Reyes." The use of my full name sent ice through my veins. I hadn't told her who I was. "How do you know my name?" "I know many things about those who enter my domain." She moved closer, her feet not touching the ground. "The rules keep most safe. Logan Brooks understands this. He's learned to respect boundaries." Logan's warning echoed in my mind. Follow the rules this time. All of them. I looked around at the twisted landscape, at the entities that had been circling me for 3 nights. They were closer now, more solid in this altered reality. Human-shaped but wrong in fundamental ways that made my brain hurt trying to process them. "These were people once," Michelle said, following my gaze. "Visitors who stayed past one. Guards who thought they knew better. Teenagers looking for thrills, all bound here now, caught between life and death." The crawling figure with the impossibly bent back dragged itself closer, and I recognized with horror the tattered remains of a security uniform. Another entity, the floating one with legs that dissolved into mist, wore the faded remnants of what might have been a Letterman jacket. "Gavin," I whispered, searching the entities for any sign of the previous night watchman. "He's still searching," Michelle said, "still trying to help me rest. He thought he knew where I was buried, but he was wrong." Her face contorted with rage. They all were. Something clicked in my mind then, a connection between the missing angel statue and Michelle's story about her remains being moved. "Your headstone is in the 3rd row," I said slowly. "But that's not where you're actually buried." Michelle's expression shifted, surprise replacing anger. "You understand more than the others did." "They moved your remains," I continued, the pieces falling into place. "After you were executed, they buried you in the 3rd row, but when you started coming back, they dug you up and hid your body somewhere else." "Yes," she hissed, the sound like wind through dead leaves. "They feared what I might become, what I had already become." I thought about the angel statue, installed decades after Michelle's death according to the town records. A guardian, the documents had called it. A memorial. The angel, I said with sudden certainty. They buried you under the angel statue, didn't they? That's why it disappears at midnight. It's sinking into your grave. Michelle went completely still, her form flickering like a bad television signal. You know where my bones rest? I nodded, seeing a possible way out of this nightmare. I think I do. The angel statue was placed there to keep you bound. A guardian over your actual burial site. That's why it vanishes when the veil thins at midnight. It's connected to you. The other entities backed away slightly, as if sensing a shift in the air. Michelle floated closer, her face inches from mine. Show me, she demanded. Take me to my bones. I looked up at the blood-red sky. How long until dawn in this place? Time moves differently here, she said. But the night will end. It always does. I pulled my feet from the sucking mud with effort. I'll take you there, to the angel's pedestal. Michelle followed as I struggled through the transformed cemetery. The ground fought against each step. Trees reached with grasping branches, and the other entities trailed behind like a macabre parade. The geography had shifted in this warped reality. Distances stretched and compressed in impossible ways, but eventually we reached the empty concrete base where the angel statue stood during daylight hours. Here, I said, pointing to the ground beneath the pedestal. This is where they hid you, not in the third row with the headstone bearing your name, but here, under a guardian meant to keep you contained. Michelle circled the concrete base, her form growing more solid with each pass. I've been searching for so long, she whispered, trapped between worlds, unable to move on. She knelt beside the pedestal and placed her hand on the ground. The moment her fingers touched the earth, the entire cemetery began to shake. The blood-red sky pulsed violently. Trees whipped back and forth, and the ground heaved like a stormy sea. The concrete base of the angel statue cracked down the middle, splitting open to reveal dark soil beneath. Michelle's form began to change, her features becoming more human, more real. The black veins faded. Her eyes regained whites around dark irises. She looked at me with an expression that might have been gratitude before the shaking intensified, throwing me to the ground. The world spun, reality fracturing around me like broken glass. I woke with a jolt, sitting upright in the driver's seat of my car. Daylight streamed through the windshield, momentarily blinding me. I was parked outside the cemetery gates, engine off, keys in the ignition. My watch read 7:15 in the morning. Confusion washed over me as I tried to piece together what had happened. The last thing I remembered was being trapped in that nightmarish version of the cemetery with Michelle and the entities, showing her the angel statue's base. How had I gotten back to my car? My phone buzzed in my pocket. Pulling it out, I saw a text from an unknown number. Camera footage shows you left at 12:59. Smart man. Logan. Camera footage. I suddenly remembered the digital camera I'd mounted in the oak tree. With trembling hands, I got out of the car and walked to the cemetery gates, which stood open in the morning light. The angel statue had returned to its pedestal, pristine white marble gleaming in the sun as if nothing had happened. I found my camera still strapped to the branch where I'd left it. Rewinding the footage, I watched in disbelief as it showed me calmly walking out of the cemetery at 12:59, getting into my car and driving away, all while I had no memory of doing so. I called Logan immediately and told him I quit. He didn't sound surprised or try to change my mind. He just said, "Figured as much," and hung up. Months passed. I found another job, tried to put the events at Willowbrook behind me. Then one morning I saw the headline in the local paper, "Historic Willowbrook Cemetery Permanently Closed." The article mentioned that during demolition work for a planned community center, construction crews had discovered human remains beneath the base of a marble angel statue. According to historians consulted on the find, The bones likely belonged to Michelle Roach, a woman executed for witchcraft in 1847. The article ended by noting that the remains had been given a proper burial in the town's new cemetery, with full funeral rites performed by a local minister.